All right, good morning, guys. Today's reading is for April 16th, and I'm in 1 Kings chapter 8 from verse 53 through chapter 10. And so yesterday, when we left off, Solomon was in the beginning of like saying his prayer to God. So after he finished praying to God, he turned around and he addressed the people. And one of the things that I just love is to keep being in remembrance of Egypt. And I'm gonna touch on that a little bit later. But he said, praise the Lord, uh in verse 56, who has given rest to his people just as he promised, right? Then he goes on to say, may the Lord our God be with us as he was with our ancestors. May he never leave us and abandon us. The reason I'm saying these is because these things are so applicable to us today. So it's not just reading it as something that Solomon said, but I'm reading it as something that applies to me today and to everybody else who chooses to believe that Jesus is Lord and Savior, right? It says, may he give us the desire to do his will in everything and obey all his commands, decrees, and regulations that he has given our ancestors, right? And he said that he prayed this in the presence of the Lord before him constantly, day and night, right? And then all the people of the earth will know that the Lord alone is God and there is no other, right? It says, so after that, after he addressed the crowd, it was like he began like one of the greatest sacrifices. So it was one of those things where they said he did a peace offering of 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep and goats. And so the king and all the people of Israel dedicated the temple to the Lord. So it was something that he did for God. And so he honored God in his presence. He addressed the people, but then he allowed them to endure in the celebration. And one of the ways that they celebrated, because it was 14 days, right? And it said 7 days was for the dedication at the altar. So that was with all of the cattle and stuff that we just spoke of. So it was that much, but it was over a period of 7 days, right? We know seven is completion. We just want to keep rocking from there, right? So now it said after that there was 7 days of festival of shelters. And so I had to actually look that up because it's one of those things where when you're doing something so great and you understand like the first 7 days, you should want to understand the second seven as well, because this was a big deal, right? And so what it said was that they would live in temporary shelters that they put up to honor or to commemorate when God brought them out of Egypt. So just remember, like everything that's going on, we know it's been over 400 years because it's like a consistent thing that they always go back to God, even though we know God was with them before that. That was like the beginning of where they are now when God brought them out of Egypt, right? And so after all of this happened, we see now that the Lord appears to Solomon a second time. So one of the things that it's one of those things like when God does something or he gives you something and you're able to walk it out and celebrate it, like, get caught up in who he is, get caught up in the celebrating of what God allowed you to accomplish and then look for him, right? And so we see that God said that he heard Solomon's prayer and his petition. And he said, as for you, if you follow me with integrity and godliness, right? Obeying all my commands, decrees, and regulations, then I will establish the throne of your dynasty um, and over Israel forever. So I just want to point out that the things that's so important to God is integrity, godliness, and obedience, right? So again, this is something that matters today because a lot of times, like God will give us something and we'll get so excited. but it's something that anything that God gives us is something that there's an expectation, not for us to just run in our own will, but for us to actually have integrity, godliness, and obedience. So that means that in order to have those things to the greatest, we have to stay close to Him. So I'm keep saying this because I want people to really get excited about reading the Word and having Him close to you in your heart, right? And he also says, but then he says the other half, and he talks about if your descendants abandon me and disobey my commands and decrees that I have given you. And that's the thing that's so important because I know we go back to the ark and when Moses spent the time on the hill to get those commandments. But the commandments that they had were commandments that was given from God. So he's like, if you don't follow the things that I have given you, he said it specifically. And that's what we gotta like, learn how to get caught up in the things that God has given us, right? Because he's very specific, right? And then he says that he would uproot them and he began to go in what their punishment would be, right? So you got to read it to find out, right? And so then he goes back again and he closes. He said, the God who brought their ancestors out of Egypt, right? Um, And he said that this would be like one of the things if they abandoned him. And again, he goes back to who brought their ancestors out of Egypt and they worship other gods instead and bow down to them. And what really stood out to me with that brought you out of Egypt is that God is so faithful for us today and he brings us out of things. And it's one of those things that it's almost like if we get to a place where we constantly keep that in our mind of what God brought us out of, like to always have a thankful spirit, a praising spirit, like a reason that you can lift your hands, you can worship, you can acknowledge God for being who He is. So I don't know what everybody's Egypt is, but we all have like some of us might have a Egypt and a couple of Goliaths, because remember you had brothers, right? But it's just those are the things that it's always like bring it to God remembrance, like when you pray and when you thank Him, right? Because this was something that was just a constant theme when it got to the actual celebration of Solomon being able to accomplish something that was set out over 400 years ago, right? So it was one of those things where after that, Solomon had many achievements, right? And it says that it took Solomon 20 years to build the Lord temple in his own palace. So when it talks about his accomplishments, it was talking about like the different towns that he was able to build up and then even rebuild. Because one of his wives, which was from the king of Egypt, had given him land that had been destroyed and burnt down. But Solomon was able to rebuild it with the wife that he married, right? And he built towns. And then he had like an organization because he didn't just rebuild things. But when he built towns, he had towns that were supply centers, that was able to have the chariots, the horses, um, it said that he built everything he desired in Jerusalem and Lebanon and throughout his entire realm, right? So it said he also built fleets and ships, but he just did a lot of things. And so it was one of those things where it ultimately ended up in him getting a lot of notoriety because one of the things that God said was that he would bless him with great wealth and great fame. So after Solomon accomplishes all of these things, he attracts the notice of the Queen of Sheba, right? And she said that heard about how he brought Solomon brought honor to the Lord, right? Right? It says to the name of the Lord. And it was one of those things that so now when she went and she came with great gifts, like not that he needed it, but it was just so impressive about what he was doing. And then it was like she was able to actually engage in conversation, and it was conversations about things that, I guess when you're able to sit down with somebody who has so much knowledge and you come prepared, like to actually have that conversation with them, and not only to have the conversation, but to know that you can kind of trust and believe like the answers and the things because you're watching what he was able to accomplish, right? And it said that she was able to talk with him about everything that she had on her mind, right? And so one of the things that everything that impressed her, it was like when she came and she sat down with him, she was impressed by the food on the table. She was impressed by the of his officials' clothing. That was the cupbearers, right? And so I guess when you think of a cupbearer, you don't think of it as being such a high position. But it was one of those things where I guess Solomon, he paid attention and detail, like everything. There was like this spirit of excellence that so now that she's in his company, she's heard all of these great things. She's able to have these great conversations, but then she's able to witness like down to the finest detail that there was just this spirit of excellence that made Solomon stand all over, out from everybody else. And so when she finished, she was like, after she witnessed everything and she said about all of the great things that she heard, that she had only actually heard half. She said, "Your wisdom and prosperity are far beyond what I was told." And so now, remember when she arrived, she came with great gifts, right? And she actually was the one that says, "Never again were so many spices brought in as those that the Queen Sheba gave to King Solomon." So she set herself apart by the gifts that she actually gave and brought. And it said that Solomon gave the queen whatever she asked for, besides all of the customary gifts, right? So it was one of those things that he was able to set himself apart and to have this fame. But again, these were the things that God had blessed him with when he sought after God for wisdom, right? So we see the blessings of and the acknowledgement of what God had promised actually walking itself out. And then it just goes to show that his wealth and his splendor, like he had so many things, like he had different trades, like he had trading ships, but he also had received every year, says 25 tons of gold. I'm like, in today's economy, that would put you up there as like one of the world's richest people, right? So we know how impressive it was that he was the richest, right, back then. And so we actually have something to say that. And he even had his trading ships, and it's crazy because I went to a museum and you could just see that this was some of the stuff that that continent that he was on is really known for. Like when it came to the things that they traded and the things that people actually went there in search of, before they became a hot spot for other trades. But it was saying that at that time, like the chariots, like even his horses, there was such quality in everything that Solomon had that he was able to build this great thing. And it all started from him being somebody who celebrated God like at every level. Because remember when we was reading before God made his first appearance, it was specific to say that like Solomon was worshiping God in the local spaces. So it was one of those things that worshiping God was just at the height of what he was doing and what he was. And it opens up the opportunity for God to offer him whatever he wanted. And so now we see him walking out in the things of not only God blessing him with wisdom, but also God adding to that, which was the riches and the fame. So I pray you guys are chalking, and I will see you guys in a little bit. Thank you.